It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take command, and we are live just after 11 a.m. on Thursday, March 13th, a.k.a. the fourth day of free agency. Legal tampering period over, Logan. Actual free agency began yesterday at 4 o'clock when teams could sign players. I think the Commanders' schedule sent their email announcing the Deebo Samuel trade. That thing went out at 4:00 on the dot. But we got plenty to talk about of what the Commanders have done. A lot of moves on the margins, but changes are made on the margins, Logan. And it's been an interesting free agency period, I think, not just for the Commanders, but generally speaking across the NFL. Like, this isn't a glory-filled free agent class, and thus there are only so many moves that any team can make.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's kind of as we were getting ready for this free agency period, something that was becoming more and more apparent the more we watched the class. And so I do think that it's interesting that, some of the big trades show up because, again, the free agency is limited. You got to kind of make those phone calls and kind of figure out who's available and how to make your team better. And so, I think that again, this is kind of how we thought it would go, but I do think so far so good for the Washington Commanders in terms of identifying pieces that I think have upside, that are good football players, that are good guys, and that are going to fit the culture here for Washington.
Yeah, for sure. And so they've got obviously the draft coming up, and we can see if they can recoup some of the pieces in terms of some of these trades and all that. And I think that's another important thing to remember is like we're trying to evaluate a picture as it is being drawn. And, what we might wind up doing is like, those artists that'll be in like a park or something and they start drawing and you're like, what is that? And then they finish and they turn the painting upside down and you're like, whoa, that's a masterpiece. And that kind of felt like what last year was like Adam Peters was painting upside down the entire time. And then all of a sudden everything pops into place and they make the NFC Championship game. And so I am wary of saying like, oh, they need to do this, they need to do that. That like we don't know the entirety of how all these pieces fit together. But what we can do is give folks an idea of kind of what these players have been that they're bringing in, how they might fit into what Dan Quinn and company want to do on both sides of the ball this year, and see if there's any themes that emerge. And that I do think that we've seen. And the first one to me, Logan, is they're trying to make sure that Jayden Daniels is going to be as good as he can possibly be, which, by the way, good strategy because he's going to be the main engine that drives them in 2025 and beyond. And so they bring back his big brother and Bobby Wagner. They bring back his safety blanket in Zach Ertz. They get him a brand spanking new left tackle in a move that, by the way, upgrades 3 positions on the offensive line at once. Left tackle, left guard, presuming that's where Coleman goes. And your swing interior guy now is all of a sudden Allegretti, and that's an upgrade over what they had last year. They also, there's a couple more things they did. There's like 5. Oh,
Deebo
Marcus.
Samuels.
Yeah, Deebo, they get him a new easy button. Marcus, they bring back, and that's on top of keeping guys like David Blau, et cetera, in the room. So they've kept the quarterback room completely intact. And if you told me going into the offseason, hey, they're going to do everything they can to make sure Jayden Daniels is successful in 2025, I'd be like, that's a good plan. A good job. Nice work, Adam.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And you think, you were talking about, kind of making assumptions about a picture that's being drawn. But I do think like if that's kind of the guiding tenet, at least on the offensive side of the football, I think it informs kind of, hey, we want to get better at probably running back or find another playmaker there or find another playmaking receiver. So those things that are still on the docket, and obviously free agency's got a little bit more time here yet for them to kind of make some of these decisions. But looking forward to the draft as well. I think those are things that they're going to look at. But I ultimately like this is the thing that drives the ship, is Jayden Daniels and his success and his maturation. Because I think everyone wants to kind of anoint and crown him after year one. But I've said this before, like one of the things about the NFL that's so incredibly difficult is you got to do it year on year. Like Tom Brady's the greatest of all time because he did it for 20 years, right? Peyton Manning, the consistency, right? Any great football player derives that moniker because they're super consistent. And so I think making it easy for him to be consistent going from year one and year two has got to be at the forefront of thought here. So yeah, bringing a guy like Marcus back, I think is a really underrated signing. But for like the emotional support animal, the mentorship, all those types of things, that's extremely important. Then also like Marcus is a good player in his own right. Like he won some games this year for him when Jaden was hurt or Jaden wasn't playing well. So I think that's all kind of great understanding. And again, we've talked about the Laremy Tunsil thing quite a bit, but I think that's that's the move right here. That's the thing that, like, in terms of making this offense significantly better, feels like it was the thing that had to be done, and it didn't seem like there was a way to get it done. And all of a sudden, um, Adam Peters, makes magic, pulls a rabbit out of his hat, and it's Laremy Tunsil, who's 6'5" and 320. But like, it's a special move for this organization because of what it does for that offensive line. And again, when you go back and watch Jayden Daniels film from last year, like, when he's got a clean pocket, he's one of the best quarterbacks in football, right? And I think you look at, again, Mahomes and his regression in the Super Bowl when there's a lot of pressure, Stroud when there's a lot of pressure, like, it is a thing. So if you can shore up that group, just improve them, a group that played well last year, make them play a little bit better through talent acquisition. I think that's to me one of the driving things in terms of this Jayden Daniels improvement narrative.
For sure. Let's double click on a couple of things at Tunsil that we didn't get to the other day, actually. A couple of key questions that I've talked about a little bit on the radio, but I haven't had a chance to talk about with you yet. One is kind of this emerging narrative out of Houston about his leadership. The other is the big penalty problem that he has. Let's start with the penalties first and circle back to the leadership thing. When you've watched him, is there anything that really jumps out about, I mean, the false starts last year were heinously bad in terms of the number, but like why they happen, any consistency, and then any other penalty issues that he's had that you are either confident that they can clean up here or worried that this might be just a part of his play that you have to deal with?
I think the false start thing is kind of who he is. Like, when I played with him in 2019, he had just been traded from Miami. That's what he does. He really tries to anticipate the snap count. He's one of the best. Again, I can't give him enough praise because he's one of the best players I've ever played with, right? He's kind of in that same pantheon as like Trent Williams, Julio Jones. Like, he is a special football player. The way he moves, the way he prepares, like, it's all what you want. But I think the false start thing that's part of who he is. That's part of what makes him good, right? Is like the same thing that makes Lane Johnson good, his ability to anticipate that silent count. He also does it. And I'm hoping that once you get him with a coach like Bobby Johnson, get him with a staff like the one here, and just say, hey, we're going to really drive this home and make this a point of emphasis for the entire offense so that everyone's on the same page, and maybe that mitigates the penalties by 10 or 15%. And I can live with that, right? He's that kind of player. He's that good.
Yeah.
So, it's funny, from a other penalty standpoint, from like a personal foul, from like a holding, from like any of that, I actually think he plays a pretty clean brand of football in those other areas. It's really the false starts that drive you home. But when I played with him in 19, I think it was 8 or something that year. And obviously that's like 20 or something this year.
It was
so
17,
there is a level.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's like a level of variance to it. And I think it can be cleaned up through coaching emphasis. And I want to say this, and again, like, the coaches in Houston, I'm sure, are doing a great job, but there was something when you watch the film fundamentally wrong with how they were coaching their protection plan, their protection philosophy. And you can tell, like, it just wasn't a level of detail. And I'm assuming that lack of detail also applied to some of the stuff they were doing with cadence. And this staff here has shown that they are hyper detailed in those areas. And so I'm hoping that that'll clean him up. He'll always have a couple. So fans, when it's week 5 and he dumps off sides, like, be ready to be mad. I understand it, but that's kind of what he does. But you're getting all of these other really high quality, like, for example, Trent, the way he plays, he gets a lot of holding calls, right? Like, that's just how he plays. Laramie's thing is that he gets a lot of false starts. Like, there's a give and take here. Everyone's going to kind of have these penalty moments. That's his thing. But I do think they'll be able to mitigate some of that just by detailing, again, rules, assignments, communication, and snap count.
Yeah. I think when you're getting your butt kicked frequently, you want to jump early. Like, there was one, I think he had 5 in the Minnesota game alone. And like, that game, they were getting absolutely destroyed. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to get an early start and make sure that I'm not giving up a sack. Well, you get too early of a start, you got that. The other thing I would ask you about the false start specific to Washington is when they were going hurry up, like, can that itself, because like they're going fast anyway. Like, is that a thing that could potentially help, or is that kind of a neutral factor in terms of where he is?
Well, I don't remember, but I don't think the offensive line here had any false starts this year, or if they did, they had very
they definitely had some, but there definitely was not a frequent occurrence.
So obviously, like, I think that either the hurry up allows them to go on a simpler cadence, right, which is a big deal, or they have like more reps with the silent count, which is going to make them more effective. So I definitely think it's something that, again, it's just time on task and reps. And so if you're repping the silent count as much as this team reps the silent count, because again, they go no huddle so much, then I do think they're going to get better at it. And I do think that'll help Laremy kind of find the rhythm, find the timing. I think back to Bill Callahan when I was here with him in Washington, he used to get the quarterbacks out and they used to work silent count. And it was just like they get the video team out there, they'd record the snap, they'd be like, hey, you're early, let's do it again. Hey, you're late, let's do it again. And they just got 1,000 reps at it. And like with anything, you get what you put into it. And so this team, just through the nature of their offense, puts a lot of time into that silent count. And so it makes them more efficient at it.
For whatever it's worth, the website, NFLpenalties.com, which is a real website, which I'm hoping is correct because I've never heard of it before. But if you're going to go to find out penalties, NFLpenalties.com seems like the site, Logan. Washington was kind of middle of the pack let's see, they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 12th. Best in the league in false starts. They had 21 in their 20 games. This is all games. Obviously, they played more than basically everybody else. They were, for whatever it's worth, the beneficiary of the third most false starts in the league. They drew other teams off sides more often than every team but Pittsburgh and Minnesota.
But is that including offensive line or is that everybody?
I think that's like when their defense drew more.
No, I'm saying like the false starts. Are they characterizing those as just, hey, like these are only offensive line penalties, or these are the entire offensive penalties?
This is average. This is just false starts in general.
Okay.
So I guess there's a position tab here, so we can really get into this potentially if you want to. But no, that's by position for the whole league. I can't. I've never.
We just found the website.
Before.
We just found the website,
and we're live. So this is all just going to happen, and there is no editing it out. It just stays in because we're live right now. So it is what it is. The point is, hopefully it's better. Hopefully it's better on the leadership front with Tunsil. This does not. I don't want to say it doesn't concern me at all, but it concerns me like 1%.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the criticism. Can you just that he's not a good leader, or like?
Yeah. So basically, it's like he's the line seems to be from multiple people. We've had I've had multiple folks that I know down in Houston on the radio show. I know the Junkies had Seth Payne on, and he said something similar from 610 Sports in Houston. And basically, it's like Tunsil's not a bad guy, but he's not a leader. And so last year when that room was getting sideways and toxic, like you'd hope that a guy that's that good could pull him out of it. I don't care about that here. Like he might be the sixth best leader or the sixth best mentality guy in the Commanders' offensive line room. Like Coleman's got a nasty streak. He's probably fifth. But then you got Allegretti and Wiley who have rings. Cosme, who's very much emerged as a leader and has a big old nasty streak. And Tyler Biotish, who's a phenomenal leader and has a nasty streak. So, like, everything from, like, hey, how are you in the meeting rooms leading to, hey, our quarterback just got hit on the sideline. Are you going to go shove somebody? I don't need Laremy Tunsil to do that. I need him to be an awesome left tackle. He's really good at that. And because of the infrastructure here, to me, this is the right kind of risk to take on. That, like, he's not a leader. Okay, as long as he's not a bad guy, I don't care. And you can obviously speak to this from personal experience of what it's like to be with him, although he was a younger player then. But like this doesn't concern me basically at all. But it has come up, so I think it's worth addressing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. Like my locker was right next to his when I was in Houston with him, and he was a great guy. You know, he was always on time to practice. He's always locked in for walkthroughs. He's not a big talker. But he'll cut up. He's a good teammate. You know, he's a good dude, man. Really enjoyed my time with him. It was only 9 weeks, but it was great spending that time with him because he's awesome. He's a pro's pro when it comes to doing the work that's required. He's locked in. So yeah, he's not very loud. He's actually a very quiet guy, I would say, on the whole, but that's fine. Tyler Biotish is going to be the leader of this group. Like he sets the tone, right? He's grown up over the last year watching him kind of communicate with those guys. And I think those are things that I would point to. It's like, he doesn't have to do that. Right. And this is Jayden Daniels' team. And like, if you're worried about people spiraling and things getting bad, like there's other people in that room you would turn to. And it's funny, like, I don't really consider, like, relatively speaking, Trent to be a great leader. You know, he's a personality that people gravitate towards, but he's not like this great, like, I'm going to mentor young kids. Like he's going to do what he's going to do. And that's not a criticism of Trent. I'm just saying, like, there are really, really good players that I've played with that they're good teammates. They're good dudes, but that's who they are. You know, that's what they are. And like, there's a lot of guys in NFL locker rooms that are like that. So I think I think it seems like people are kind of making a mountain out of a molehill a little bit. I understand when you're paying a guy a lot of money, he's your franchise left tackle, you want him to have some leadership qualities. But I've played with a lot of dudes who are really, really, really good at football that aren't great mentors, aren't great leaders in the traditional sense. And I think the one thing you're getting here from him is like, I'm going to bring Ryan Kerrigan up because I played with him. It wasn't like he was a great leader either, but he like worked really hard, shut his mouth, and did what he was supposed to do. And I think Laremy kind of falls in that bucket a little bit. So there's different leadership styles. There's different people. You need to get people to get in line and follow the leader. And I do feel like he's kind of a guy that's not going to make waves, good or bad, but you have guys in the locker room, like you just said, that kind of fit that bill. So
having covered Ryan, I think Ryan's a great example. And I think I'm glad that you brought him up because he's beloved. And like, I think now people are like, oh, he must've been a leader. Like he's a coach now, but like, Ryan wasn't. Ryan just did his work. And like, you could always look at Ryan and be like, that guy's doing his work and he'll lead by example, right? But I think at times in some of the teams that Ryan was on where they weren't very good, and like maybe a guy like DJ Swearinger, whose voice shouldn't have been as loud, was loud. It would have been great if there had been someone else to step up. Because I think the team at times looked at Ryan as like the organization, I should say, looked at Ryan as leader. And it's like, no, don't ask him to be the vocal leader out front of the team because it's not who he is. Just be really happy that he's going to get you double-digit sacks every single season, and he did that. And Laremy Tunsil's the same kind of guy. And is it great when your best players are your leaders? Yeah, it's easy. It's easy to follow that along when it's Bobby Wagner or Jayden Daniels or whoever. But there are definitely guys. I mean, Jeremy Reeves is a special teamer. He's a huge leader on this team. Like, it doesn't have to be the highest paid guy. And this is something I think Dan Quinn is great at, is he understands what people's strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how to use them on and off the field. And I think that's part of what made the Brotherhood so brotherhoody last year, and is empowering the right people. And if he can just come in and be a part of that atmosphere, like it'll rub off on him in a good way. And I think that they can get the best version of Laremy Tunsil. And the draft picks that they give up, our people aren't going to be thinking about him a whole lot if he's dominant at left tackle.
Yeah, and I think he can be. I think he will be. And I think he's the type of guy that really is a good culture adapter, right? And I think like what I mean by that is like if the culture is bad, he's going to do his thing. But if the culture is good, that he'll hang out, man. He'll play. He'll like goof off. He'll do cards. He'll cut up if the locker room's good. And I think like one of the things about this locker room, one of the things about Dan is he's excellent at that. And when you get a guy who's motivated and invested, like a guy who's already a very good professional, like you're going to get more out of him. And I think that's a great point he's never going to be, General Patton out there leading the troops down the field, but he's going to do his job at an extremely high level. And there's other people in the room that can handle that for you. And I do think also the culture like will bring him in a way, which will be really nice. So really I think this is the best signing, maybe of the offseason for any team. Like, I'm not saying that hyperbolically, like this is huge for this organization. And I can't wait to get him here. And I think it just does so much for that group of 5 up front, group of 6, 7, if you count the swing guys in there too. So I can't wait to see what Dan Quinn and what this culture does for him and how he elevates, Jayden Daniels.
All right, this is the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, and we are live with you on YouTube at the Team 980, at Craig Hoffman, and at 1067 The Fan. Of course, if you're listening to this later on the audio, we told you we might do this. This is why you got to subscribe wherever it is if you want to be able to join us live. So wherever you're watching or listening right now, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. And we will do this occasionally, pop up live if there's breaking news or, for instance, a dynamic news situation like we're in right now, where if we record a podcast at 11 a.m. and put it out by 12:30, there's a chance that something else happened and it's dated. We don't want to do that. That said, about 15 minutes from now, we are going to try to do a little bit of predicting, a little bit of foreshadowing in terms of what we think the Commanders still have on their to-do list. So we will try our best to discuss that, knowing that they could sign someone 5 seconds after we sign off and make that part of the conversation at least some point moot. Let's take a look at some of the other guys, though. And Logan, let's start on the D-line because they make multiple signings here. I think we talked some about the Javon Kinlaw thing when you joined me live on the radio the other day. Yeah, we did, because he was the first guy in. But to me, the theme of the guys that they've signed is they're going after the big bodies. And you and I talked about this last training camp, where we walked out on the practice field and we're like, that's an Adam Peters guy. That's an Adam Peters guy. That's an Adam Peters guy. Because they were all the big dudes. And between Kinlaw, who's 6'5", 320, Eddie Goldman, who they signed, the nose tackle, played most of his career with the Bears, last year with the Falcons. He's 6'5", like 330. He's a mountain of a man. You played with him in Chicago. And then late last night, they signed Dietrich Wise, who was a 5-sack guy last year for the Patriots, played very well for them for quite a while. 6'5", 280-pound defensive end. It seems like they are, I don't know how great of run players these guys are, but at the very least, they're going to have some bulk this year to, I think, not have the line of scrimmage moved in the way it was in the past.
Yeah, and I think you're just getting players who, again, like one of the big weaknesses for the Commanders, I think, was, like run defense. So I think when you go out and sign a guy like Goldman, like that's like his superpower. When you watch his film, he's a big guy, but he's got enough twitch and enough burst to kind of create some knockback. He understands kind of what it takes to sit and split a double team, which is extremely important. And because of the athletic upside of a guy of his size, he can penetrate a little bit. And so I do think when you're looking for a guy that maybe can keep Bobby Wagner clean, keep Frankie Louvu clean, keep that other kind of big Buffalo nickel safety type player clean in the box, like he's going to do that, but he also has some playmaking upside. Now, he's 30 years old or whatever he is, like he's not in his prime any longer, but he still can throw that pitch at a very high level, and I think that's extremely important. When you look at Wise, man, he's been honestly one of my favorite players to watch over the last probably 5 years in the NFL. He is a big dude like you were talking about. He's okay against the run, but as like a stand-up defensive end, I think he does a little bit better. He can put his hand in the dirt, but he also has some pass rush juice. He has some ability to kind of like do the dance of a pass rusher. And to me, he's like a perfect replacement to Cleveland Farrell. And I actually think he's a little bit more of a competent football player, right? So when you're in this 4-down front, you get a guy who's just slightly more aware, has a little bit more pass rush upside, kind of understands when to throw those different moves. You can loop him on a stunt. He's got a good feel for getting after the passer. And so I think adding those two pieces are just two solid football players, right? Two really solid high floor football players that on a 1-year deal, what are they, like $6 million each, something like that?
Wise was $5 million. I think Goldman's right around the same, 5 or 6.
Yeah. So that, to me, that's a perfect fit, right? They're guys that they're good pros. They elevate your defense right now. They help you in areas that you were struggling with last year, and they just bring a level of consistency that you need on the defensive side of the football, like we talked about when we were kind of doing the defensive review of how the defense played over the course of last season. Then you look at Kinlaw, and I was going through his film and kind of watching plays, and is he an up and down player? Yeah, but he does have something very unique, something you can't coach, and that's the physical explosiveness and power. And if you can harness that and get it going in the right direction, that could really, really be a nice piece. And I think you look at like the things you talked about, like Daryl Tapp knows him, Adam Peters knows him, like Jeff Ulbrich and Robert Saleh, who Dan Quinn knows really, really well, probably endorsed him at a high level. So they understand exactly what they're getting here. And when you watch the highs of Kinlaw, you're like, man, this guy could be something extremely special. Now, there's inconsistency to his play, but I look at that and I say, like, if you get him in the right role, you mentioned him maybe playing that big power end in this defense, potentially. We don't know for sure, but that's something on the table. And I think about him matching up with a tackle on the open side edge and him just denting edges, being physical, using his length and size and speed. Like, that is a devastating proposition. Then you can bump him inside on 3rd down and just say, hey, man, pin your ears back and go get it. And I'm like, dude, that's exciting. Now, a lot of things have to fall in place for that, but I think that's why you trust Daryl Tapp, you trust Ryan Kerrigan to maximize somebody who, like there's that, what is it, the Bill Parcells, like the world principle. There's only a couple people on the planet Earth that look and move like Kinlaw. And I can honestly say that he's a very unique player in that regard. And I think fans will fall in love with him the first second he walks on the field at training camp because of that size frame stuff. But if you get him, that's a plus player with 2 players in the front that are very, very solid. Goldman and Wise are very, very solid players. And like, that sounds like I may be being pejorative towards them, but they're good. They're just good NFL football players that make your team and raise the floor of the defense just from these signings. So I love all of these signings. I love the upside play of Kinlaw, but I love the floor that Wise and Goldman present.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out, like, these guys are all going to be rotation players. Like, none of these guys are going to be relied upon to play 900 snaps. Like, these are all 400 to 600 snap guys that hopefully can play their best on a very consistent basis because they are going to be fresh all the time. And like, Goldman's going to be in a rotation with Kinlaw and Newton and Payne and maybe another young guy. And then on the edge, you have Wise, you have Armstrong, and then they'll probably, Kinlaw maybe is out there some too, Jean Baptiste, and then they probably sign another guy or two. Or that could be their first round pick is an edge in the draft. Obviously, I think a lot of people, I would say myself included, hope that is one of the directions that is available to them at the 29th pick or the 30 whatever pick if they can trade back and recoup some draft capital. So I think that's an important thing to point out. The other thing about Kinlaw specifically, because he's the only guy that they've gone multi-year on here, which is something I do want to talk about in a second. We got a really good question in the YouTube chat kind of about this. But $15 million a year for Javon Kinlaw is the going rate for a rotational starting caliber defensive piece, right? A guy who's kind of that fringe starter, like high-end backup, low-end starter guy. And because of the way the cap has gone, raising $20 million a year the last 2 years, this is the equivalent to like an $11 million a year deal 2 years ago. Literally 2 years ago, if you look at cap percentage. So if I told you that they signed Javon Kinlaw to an $11 million deal per year, I don't think anyone blinks twice. They're like, yeah, okay. Like that's what happens for veteran backups at an expensive position. And realistically, we just have to get our brains around the fact that the cap has gone up and these guys are just going to be a little bit more expensive, but it's not actually hurting the team in any kind of way. And in that way, stop counting other people's money. Good for Javon Kinlaw. Hope that he, in his generational wealth or whatever charities he supports or whatever, that money goes to good uses. So at the end of the day, like I think that, and also they've got plenty of cap space to do whatever else they want. So this is not inhibiting them in any kind of way. And I think what it's done is provided them with an even more solid floor. If you think like Wise is an upgrade over Furl, et cetera, they still have to probably find that other edge piece, and whether that's re-signing Fowler or a couple other guys that we can talk about. But they have also, I think, given themselves some more versatility. Like they tried to do some of the odd spacing stuff last year, and they did it. They did some funky stuff, and a lot of teams are doing this, right? They play like kind of even spacing and an odd front where they just tack another guy on the end of the line of scrimmage. But now if they wanted to play a true like 3-4 for whatever reason, they like the matchups, they think another team's runs really struggle against those fronts. Like Eddie Goldman being a true nose or a guy that can play a true shade provides you a different option. And for a defense that's super multiple, Logan, I think that's pretty exciting.
No, I do think that's that'll be interesting to see what they do, and I think that's one of the things. I love your analogy you made earlier about the kind of evaluating a picture that's being drawn. They could do that, yeah. And we talked about how they have that install in where they can, play a 3-4. But I also think like Goldman would be great playing a shade. Like he would be great just playing like in a 4-down front, playing a shade, playing off the center's shoulder, and he'd probably be more effective there. And then you get Payne playing a true 3 technique, or Johnny Newton playing a true 3 technique where they can penetrate and be aggressive because you've got this guy who can eat that front side double. Or you've got Kinlaw playing the end and he can really dent that edge down and really collapse that thing in and force them back into, Goldman, Payne, Newton on the interior. So I do think there is, I think there's a lot of stuff they can do. And I think that's one of the exciting parts about this point of the season is I like the football players they signed. I like the roles they fit. I like when I watch the film, I like what they're about. I like the measurables. That's great. But I also just like when you watch Wise, man, you see a guy who loves ball. He's physical. He's aggressive. He's passionate. He's energetic. He's animated. Like that's what I want this team to be. When I watch Kinlaw, I see an explosion of athletic potential. And so now it's like, where does it all fit? How does it all come together? Yeah. Could it be a 3-4 like we talked about when we did that 3-4 show? Absolutely. Maybe it's a 4-down front, or maybe it's a true under with a Sam on the ball. Like who knows what this sucker looks like, but they got they got football players. And that makes me confident that they can kind of get into whatever they need to maximize this group and kind of present the best defense moving forward. And I think that's the other thing. Like last year there was, what are they doing? Like this feels very clear. It's like we're going to get guys that are physical, that have some pass rush upside, that fill in some of our gaps. Like I think about Carl Davis last year, how he's kind of this late signing to help kind of manage some of the stopping the run issues that the defense was having. Like Goldman, like that's his thing. Like that's what he's been doing since he came into the NFL. And when you watch his film, it shows up as a guy that not only can stop the run, but can move laterally down the line of scrimmage at a high level. So I look at this and I say, yeah, like they can do whatever you need them to do, whatever you want them to do. But I do think like they've got good football players, and that makes that possible.
For sure. And speaking of versatility, their back end signings as well, like those are guys that have some of that, and including one of Dietrich Wise's former teammates in New England and Jonathan Jones. And if you can play for Belichick, you can do anything.
Yeah.
Because and those are two of Belichick's favorite guys because of the versatility they did bring. And so Jonathan Jones on the back end corner, who played a lot of slot early in his career, moved outside the past couple of years. His worst year was probably last year, but like he went from playing in a Bill Belichick defense to Gerard Mayo and whatever they were doing in New England, which was generally a disaster last year, which is why that staff is no longer there. So yes, he is getting older. Yes, he is on the wrong side of the age cliff for a corner, but he's an intriguing piece. And apparently he's a stand-up, like A+ dude. And I think having that kind of guy who's a little bit older in a room with Marshawn Lattimore to where Mikey Sainer still isn't necessarily having to take the full burden of the leadership responsibility. And by the way, as you're grooming your future leaders, like we talked about with a guy like Marcus or whoever else on offense to kind of show Jaden the way, having another example in the room for Mikey is fantastic in terms of his long-term growth and development. I love the Jonathan Jones signing for those reasons. I don't know if he can play or not, and that is something that we should definitely talk about. But I'll also tack on to talk about in this conversation, Logan, for you is Will Harris, who played super versatile last year in New Orleans. I mean, this dude would line up at free safety, he'd line up at strong safety, he'd line up in the box, he'd line up in the slot. He lined up, depending on some certain alignments they had, he'd be an outside corner, typically like more kind of clamped in. He's not like on an island outside, but every once in a while. So they get two more guys that can play a whole ton of places in this defense. And it just screams like, again, they want to have options. They want to be versatile. And then it's a matter of putting the guys in the best positions possible to execute.
Yeah, so I think Jonathan Jones is really interesting, especially because the contract value, what was it, 1 for 5.5?
Yeah, it's 1 for 5.5. Another $1 million potential incentives could get up to 6.5.
And he feels like he's going to be a kind of rotational backup type guy, kind of like your Michael Davis analogous, right? Kind of like your replacement for Benjamin St-Juste, a guy that can play the slot if you have to, can play outside if you need him to. And when I go back and watch his key plays from last year, like I think he's got a lot of things that he does really well. First off, he's crazy explosive and twitchy. Like all those kind of like movement skills you want from a corner, he still has that at a high level. I think he tracks the football. I think he plays the football in the air at a really high level. And so what I mean by that is like I think everyone's familiar with St-Juste and kind of how the ball would be in the air. And it's like he's a little bit lost. Like Jones doesn't have that, right? He's able, even though he's a smaller guy, he's able to play the hands, track the football. He gets a lot of batted balls. He has a fair amount of interceptions in his career. It's interesting because he is, to me, more of a slot player, slot special teams type guy. And maybe that's the role he falls into here, kind of as your punt returner. He played a couple snaps for on offense early in his career, getting reverses and things like that. He's very, very explosive.
I think he was a 4.33 guy coming out. Again, that was a long time ago, but like 4.33, even if you're slow, is like 4.4 now. And I would give a lot to run a 4.4.
Yeah, no doubt. And so when I look at this, I say to myself, like, he's basically your swing secondary player for the outside guys in the nickel. And that's what you want. You want a guy who's a good, competent football player, right? And I'm saying this term a lot, but I feel that way about Goldman. I feel that way about Wise. I feel that way about Jones. Like if you need it, like if Sanders still goes out or there's a package where he's playing the nickel, I feel very comfortable putting Jones on the perimeter and having match up. Now, is he going to get beat by bigger wide receivers on occasion? Absolutely. Like when you watch the Jets game, like they throw a couple of jump balls to Mike Williams and Mike Williams just kind of gets over top. But I will say he's a competitive son of a gun because on this, there's a drive where they throw a jump ball, they throw an in, and it looks like they're picking on him a little bit. They get down the red zone, they throw a fade to him, and I'll be darned if Jones doesn't punch that thing out and prevent the touchdown, and it leads to a field goal. So he's a competitive, competent football player. Are there limitations to his game? Yes. Like that's why he's on a 1-year, $6 million deal, right? Because he's not a perfect player. He's a little bit older. He's a little bit undersized, but I think he's going to be a very great value add. And I think about some of the limitations that Michael Davis and St-Juste had, and I think he's a significant upgrade over both of those players, right? So I think that's ultimately what you're looking at here. And we'll see what they do at the nickel spot. And maybe he ends up doing that, or maybe Will Harris does that. But I like that they got a guy who's played a lot of ball, got a lot of experience, and has the skill to play significant minutes if you need him to.
I also wonder if they just say, Mikey, you did such a good job outside last year. We're going to keep you there. Like if Jones is a slot guy, like you can, if I guess this is a good point to make, right? If the free agency is about setting the floor, if the worst case scenario is that Mike Sanders still plays outside again, and Jonathan Jones is your nickel, and then Marshawn's on the other side. Like, that's not a bad worst case scenario. You can mess with that. And then hopefully you find a corner in the draft, whether it's first, second round, whatever, who can emerge and be like, actually, I'm good enough to play right away. I'm good enough to start. I'm going to go outside. Mikey, you get to kick back inside. And then Jonathan Jones is your dime corner / depth piece. And you can do some stuff with him, or maybe he plays a little bit of safety and some 3 safety set. Like, he's a versatile and smart enough and athletic enough dude that you can do some different stuff with him. Same with Mikey. Like, those two pieces become, I don't want to say interchangeable, because like Mikey's a young guy who's here for the future, but like, for 2025, they're somewhat interchangeable pieces. And so I think that's an exciting thing to say, like, okay, if free agency is about establishing the floor, this guy's definitely not a bad floor to have. I think Harris is an even better player than that. Like, I started watching some of his tape the other day. Dude, I really like what I saw from him in New Orleans. Like, he's physical. He seems to have pretty good instincts in coverage. His first play of the year last year, Bryce Young throws one right to him. So I don't know how much ball skills are on display for a ball that hits you right in the chest. But like, he does have a pick on the first play of the season last year. That was fun first snap to watch. And, considering Chin is gone, now Defoe's gone, he signs in Buffalo. I think they got a starting caliber guy at a pretty decent price. In fact, he's half the cost of Jeremy Chin. And not that Chin might not be a little better. I don't know. He's double the player that Will Harris is. So I think that's a good signing as well.
Yeah, and I kind of put them both in similar buckets. Like, I like Will Harris as well, but he kind of is that box kind of big nickel. He can play some safety stuff. I don't know if you love him playing safety, but is a little bit better in coverage than Chin. Like, he does a lot of really good stuff. And I put him in a similar bucket to Jonathan Jones. Like I think Will Harris is probably more like starter or role player ready in some of those packages that Chin was in last year. But I do think that, like you said, he takes good angles with the ball. He's physical on tackles. He understands kind of where to fit when he's playing that nickel role. Is he the best in man coverage? No, but is he serviceable? Yeah. Like, is he always going to be a matchup you're always kind of like wringing your hands about a little bit? Yeah, but it's really hard to find elite coverage players that can play the box and play high level man coverage. And I think the interesting thing when you were talking, I had this thought, both of these players are good players, and talk about setting the floor. Like, shoot, you feel like Will Harris was great last year for New Orleans, and so was, to a certain extent, Jonathan Jones. Like, they were really good floor players for a team. But also now, if you were to draft a corner, you could draft, let's say you draft a nickel player, like the kid from Texas or the kid from Georgia, Starks, right? They could come in and play this nickel role, and then Jones all of a sudden can back up on the perimeter. Or Will Harris is kind of the safety, but you draft, maybe a guy that fits your archetype a little bit more, like the guy I just watched. I don't think the Commanders are going to select him, but the safety from Iowa State, who's 6'3", he's 220, a little bit bigger body, a little bit more range. Maybe you draft him for some upside, but you do have great floors here already. So let's say neither one of those players are ready at the gate. You've got really excellent football players. And I think ultimately that's what I feel good about. And I'm going to keep reiterating this point, is that both of these guys are excellent, like really like excellent by NFL standards. Because I think everyone thinks excellent is like, the top tier of the market, right? Oh, these guys are tremendous. These guys are good football players, right? They can play teams. They can do a lot of different stuff. They play the game the way you're supposed to play it. And so if that's your floor, you feel great about it. Then you have the flexibility to be like, hey, we can upgrade with this piece, or we can upgrade with this piece, or maybe Hamilton makes a jump this offseason. We feel comfortable putting him in this Buffalo. Like, those are all on the table here. But I think it leads to a better competition and just a more fleshed out group from a talent, and not even a talent standpoint, because I think, St. Juice is talented, but just better football players, right? Guys that have a better feel for the game. Both these guys fit that bill.
Better up here. Like, these are guys, like, they have really gone in, like, I think Nikki had this stat the other day that, like, the average age of these signings is 30, which scares you a little bit, I think, because, and this has pained me all free agency long to be like, oh my God, these old guys who are 5-ish years younger than me at this point in my life. And I'm sure it pains you even more as someone who's a couple years older and has retired from the NFL and actually played 10 years in the league. It's not like you had a short career. But like, that's a little old for NFL, but like, these guys are also at the tail end, or maybe depending on the position and the guy, in the middle of their primes. And like, mentally, they're solid. Like, there's just going to be a intelligence to this football team that hopefully the physical skill sets are there, but they're not going to have like the confidence or the crises of confidence that you had with a Benjamin St. Juste last year.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that is really tough about the situation for Adam is that you not only do you have to make sure the team is getting better, but you have to make sure the team is experienced enough to make a run in the playoffs if you have to. If everything works out, you kind of catch that lightning in the bottle again, you're making a run. Like we need football players who are good enough and mature enough to handle that while also getting younger at the same time. So that's where it becomes extremely, extremely difficult. And we didn't really talk about this with the Laremy Tunsil thing, but like I think there's a semi-awareness or an understanding of like, hey, we need picks this year. We're going to try and keep our as many picks as we can this year because we know we need young developmental talent on the roster while also maintaining this high floor that we're talking about. So I think that's something that's kind of paradoxical about this group is bringing in older guys that have some experience that can play football right now is extremely valuable for this group. But you also kind of need to say, hey, where are we getting younger? And I think that's where the Kinlaw thing is really interesting to me because at 27 years old, he's still got a lot of runway here and he can be a piece you can build around if he does figure it out.
For sure. And so this brings me to the question from Tyrone in the chat that I thought was a really good one that we should talk about real quick. And then we'll get to the remaining to-do list quickly on the way out and some names that we're kind of keeping an eye on. But Tyrone asks, do you think this free agency is about the middle between winning and building? Because Kinlaw is the only guy that is on a multi-year deal here. So they're going to keep a ton of cap flexibility going into next year, even if they sign a couple of other guys to one-year deals, right? Like they do not have a lot of money tied up long-term. We've talked about this with, Rivera's era of drafting, not producing a ton of players that you're looking to extend. And that's where most teams are spending their money is on their own guys. Washington doesn't have that, which means they need to go get some guys they can call their own. That's why they make the Tunsil trade is they just don't have that in the building. And then because they never went through a stretch where they were bad and good at drafting, like bad at football, good at drafting, which is how like the Texans say have built up their roster. Some other teams have built up. Like you go from being bad to we're now picking 29th in the draft. We have our franchise quarterback and he's too good too quickly to accumulate other high draft picks. They're going to have to get creative here. But I do think that like the answer is multifaceted. One, the simplest answer is yes. They are trying to build something. They're trying to maintain the culture, the brotherhood, the intensity, the intelligence, like a lot of the foundational things that they want their program to be about are represented in these signings. But they're also doing it in a way that doesn't tie them down long term, that keeps the flexibility to be able to build. And I would say additionally, outside of that answer, it also just wasn't that good of a free agent class. And I don't think there's going to be a ton of free agent classes that are good moving forward. There's always going to be some level of hole plugging that happens in floor raising, that happens in free agency, especially if, as is expected with the Netflix money and all this other stuff coming in, these economic factors that are allowing the cap to raise, all of a sudden teams aren't having to make as many tough choices because they can re-sign their own guys on the regular. So they're going to have to obviously eventually hit some late round draft picks if they want to truly be great. And they're going to have to get their Fred Warner, their Hufanga, their guys that Adam got, their George Kittle that Adam got in San Francisco. But I think that's my answer to that question in terms of this middle between building and winning. Logan, how would you approach that answer?
I mean, I think that's exactly what you got to do. And it's a unique situation to be in because the team like this is, I don't want to sound mean, but the team last year was ready and they weren't ready at the same time, right? We kind of like Jayden Daniels did tremendous. Like Terry did great job. Zach Ertz kind of has his career resurgence. The offensive line plays above its skis. The defensive is opportunistic. But I think if you look at it across the board, like just from a talent standpoint, you're like, there's still a lot to be desired just from a pure like horsepower talent standpoint. You compare them to Philly, you compare them to Detroit. So I do think that this front office is very intelligent. I think they understand that, right? So you do kind of have to walk this line of saying, how do we get blue chip talent in the building while making sure we're good enough to win a playoff game? And that's the thing that's really, really hard because I think the knee-jerk reaction by a lot of fans, myself included, would be like, you have to re-sign Jeremy Chin. You have to do it. But here, we can save a couple bucks. We can get back on a one-year deal with Harris. And Harris, to me, the difference between Harris and Chin is, I know fans probably think it's huge. It's negligible.
It's not $8 million huge.
Yeah, it's negligible. So you're not tied into a 2-year deal, right? You still give yourself an opportunity to invest money next year. So the floor still stays treetop high, but we still give ourselves flexibility next year to be like, hey, when this blue chip safety hits the market, player X, right? we can then invest the money in the player that we want as opposed to over investing in a player that we're not sure about, and I think that's where it's kind of reaffirming your point, just framing it a different way. It's like you have to do both things. You got to make sure the roster continues to improve while not tying yourself in, or the roster has to maintain serviceability while looking for these blue chip pieces, if that makes sense.
100%. And the ability to take on potentially big salary is something that you need to be able to do, right? Because what happens if someone's available at the trade deadline? Or all of a sudden Cincinnati, like apparently their asking price for Hendrickson's insane. But what happens?
Which I would ask, which it should be. Like if you're Cincinnati, ask for crazy stuff. Somebody's going to be desperate enough to pay it. But the thing I keep thinking about is like Micah Parsons going to be a free agent next year. If they, you know what I'm saying? And if you want to onboard that talent, that's going to be a max contract for a premium position, long-term deal. Like you need to have some cap flexibility. That's an example. I'm not saying he's going to get out of Dallas. There's no inside baseball there, but just as a name that'll be a free agent next year, like that. This is the type of stuff you got to be thinking about, and I think Adam's just thinking about it.
Nobody knew that the Tunsil deal was a thing that could happen. Like you have to have that flexibility. All right, let's wrap up here. It's the Take Command podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. We're live with you on YouTube. Take Command free agency special here. And this is the part of the podcast, Logan, that I'm most afraid is going to get dated instantly. But hey, if it happens, that means there's more stuff for me to talk about on the radio at 4 o'clock today. So I will take it. This is the what do they do next section of the podcast. We just go like 5 minutes here. I think the positions are fairly obvious, right? There's no great analysis. You don't need my decade of covering the NFL or your decade playing it in 5 years of being an analyst now to say they could use some more bodies at wide receiver, corner, and edge. Got it. Okay, cool. The question is what archetype of player are you interested in, or what specific players are you interested in if we really want to play the dangerous, will this be dated instantly game? At wide receiver, so I've got Greg Rosenthal's list here, top 101 players available, and the top player available on his list from his original 101 is the 11th best player, and that's Amari Cooper. He's really interesting to me as like an outside guy. He didn't really play that well in Buffalo last year. He's kind of done an every other year thing. Like if they signed him to a cheap deal, I wouldn't be mad about it. I'm not like they have to go get Amari Cooper. But in terms of the wide receiver market, what do you think that they like? What is interesting to you? What would make you go like, "Yep, that's a box that they've now checked off," knowing that like the draft is obviously still an option, but you want to have a higher floor than you currently do right now because you don't have enough bodies in the receiver room right now.
I mean, quite frankly, like this is going to sound crazy, but I think depending on Noah Brown's health, depending on OZ and what his contract's going to look like moving into next year, I think you feel happy with both those guys because both those guys to me kind of fit that Will Harris, Jonathan Jones type level. Maybe you give them a 1-2 year extension, 2-year deal. You feel really good about it. And they have a really high floor and they know your system. They know what Cliff wants. By all accounts, they're great guys to have in the building. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm looking for that type of player. Amari Cooper is a name, right? He's a name that fans recognize, and he's had a very successful career. So this is not an indictment of him in any way, but I don't think he's the right fit here in Washington. I think you need a guy who's going to do the dirty work, be physical, be a great teammate. And I don't know, I don't have the list in front of me, but I'm sure there are guys that are maybe less kind of name brand that fit that role. And I think, again, to Adam Peters' credit, Lance Newmark's credit, all these guys in the front office, they've done a good job finding people like that. And you can tell they watch a ton. Like when I turned on the film for all these free agents, right?
Yeah.
I was like, I get it. I get why they're here.
I mean, even a guy last year they signed in KJ Osborne. I was like, I get why they want him here. Now he wound up not doing anything, but you flip on the film and you're like, oh, he plays his face off.
Yeah. And so again, like that's something that I'm saying, like I don't have the time, the manpower, or the staff to go through every free agent and be like, this is a Commander. But I will tell you this, fans, right? Fans of the Commanders, there are really good football players out there that maybe don't have the highest PFF grade that this staff has a vision for. And they say, let's get that guy in here. So that's what I would say too, is like the names are great, right? But I think there's I'm going to say a diamond in the rough, maybe. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
If that's the right thing. There's a person here somewhere that fits exactly what they need. Physical, competitive, tough, is where they're supposed to be in the route combination. And I look at what OZ, what Diami, what Noah did here last year, and I'm like, there's a guy like that somewhere. There's guys like that in the draft this year, right? It's like in the 5th round, you can get a receiver like that in the draft this year. And maybe that's what they do. But I do think, like you said, you want to make sure the floor there is at a serviceable spot. And maybe they feel Luke's going to take a developmental step and he could be that guy. So that's
that's definitely a part of it. It's just like, what are the other bodies that you want in there? I'm trying to find. So the one young guy that's kind of in this mix is Elijah Moore. He's 25 years old. He was at Ole Miss. I'm trying to see if he ran at the combine. He didn't run at the combine, so I don't have a speed number.
Was he in
Cleveland?
Cleveland last year?
Yeah. Second round. He was 34th overall pick. He's a borderline first round guy. Not that long ago. Like he's been pretty productive. But like slot guy, I don't know about him as a person. I don't know about him doing the dirty work and stuff, but like on the not Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, 30-plus-year-old guys whose names you've heard of that I don't think fit here. He's definitely an interesting guy. Also, by the way, if you want a guy that will do the dirty work and is like the smartest dude in football, Cooper Kupp is now available. And now that you don't have to trade for him, like there are worse things you can do than bring Cooper Kupp into your receiving room. Even if I don't know exactly how productive he can be at this stage of his career. Corner. The one like high upside play that is available, I don't think is a fit here, but I'm just going to mention him real quick. Asante Samuel Jr. He's 25 years old. He's made a bunch of plays, but he also he struggled in press and isn't very physical in the run game. So I don't think he fits what they want. But I do feel like they need to find one more veteran guy who's probably more of like a teams guy. That puts a floor underneath you, and then you also draft someone.
Yeah, and I think this is a position that's interesting. So while at receiver, I think you're looking for just a good football player. There's even a guy on the for receiver on the futures contracts that was on the practice squad last year.
Yeah,
he's 6'5", he's 225, he's got 35-inch arms. Like maybe that guy figures it out. He's played some football now, but I'm not saying he is or isn't. I forget his name at the moment, but. Like all I'm saying, like that to me feels like a much easier position to figure out. I think at corner, you're looking for a little bit of an upside play. And the next two positions we're going to talk about, I feel that same way. So you're looking for someone who has kind of like size, speed, playmaking ability at the corner spot. You're looking for the same thing, I think, at edge rusher, right? And that's where the free agent market being weak hurts you, right? Because now it's like the only way I can get that guy is through a trade. And teams are like, I'm not going to give you a premier edge rusher or a premier corner for anything, right? So that's where these, to me, feel like you bring in another floor piece, right, in both positions. Like maybe you re-sign Jalen Holmes on the defensive line. Maybe you bring back Noah Benogany in the secondary. But then at 29, like that's what I'm circling in terms of upside play. It was offensive line for a while, but they figured that out with Laremy Tunsil. Now it's like, hey, of these two remaining spot, who's our best player as edge rusher and who's our best player at secondary? And I would say, knowing this staff and knowing what Dan values, again, I have no inside baseball on this. I'd say they probably go edge, but again, like that's what you're looking at here. I'm thinking probably first and second round pick in that category, and then maybe a third, fourth, fifth round receiver. I don't remember the allocation of picks at the moment because of the trade. It's all messed up, but that's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment.
Yeah. No longer a third. They have a fourth, which they didn't have previously. So, that's where those things stand. I give them the benefit of the doubt on corner that they can go find someone in like the fifth round who's long and rangy, and then all of a sudden is good.
But you'll find. But I'm saying like yes, but
because they've done it. Like they've done it repeatedly.
To have a playmaking element there, an upside play, if that makes sense. Maybe not for this year, but a talented piece that could grow, like Darren Porter from Iowa State. Like he's not ready this year.
There's someone in the chat who's going to be very, very happy with that. There's someone that mentioned him like 30 minutes ago is like, that's their guy.
Yeah, but he's not going to be ready this year probably. He's probably a teams guy, maybe a rotational guy, but a guy that kind of fits that upside mold, like Zaire Franklin from UTSA, like another longer kind of is it Zaire Franklin? No, I'm messing
Zaire
it up
Franklin's
now.
the linebacker from the Colts.
But there's a guy from UTSA right now. What's that?
I said go Orange. He's a Cuse guy.
Go Orange. Go Cuse.
Anthony's best friend. I don't know if you knew that. Personal connection.
I did not know that.
Love me some Zaire Franklin.
Yeah, but like you got your Azari Thomas from Florida State. You've got your Siobhan Ravel from East Carolina. There's guys that you can pick here that fit that bill, is what I'm saying. It just like Darren Porter is a later round guy, probably a fourth round pick is where I'd feel comfortable taking him, that has developmental upside. So I'm saying like you just need to find somebody there that kind of fits that, could project to a starting kind of upside play at some point. I think at edge rusher, it's kind of the same thing, So that's where it's like these are interesting, and it's interesting because the free agent pool at the moment is not super dynamic in those areas. And I don't think they'll ever will be, because those positions are so valuable.
Well, the one guy that to me is interesting that does have some upside that I'm kind of confused as to why he hasn't signed yet. I just wonder if he's not getting the number that he wants is Azeez Ojulari.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, he was pretty good for the Giants. I feel like you mentioned him every time they played. It's like, hey, you got to watch out for this guy. He's 25 years old. He's available. Like, yeah. I'm very interested in him. And then there's also Kayvon Chason, who's young and got some pass rush juice as well. I'm not as familiar with him, but I know that he's a younger guy that was a higher pick that now as he's getting to be 25 years old, like, can he figure it out? So there are a couple, at least, edge rushers. There aren't, outside of Samuel, there's not really that option at corner.
And so what I would say is, like, those are good. Like, Ojulari is a good example. I don't think he's ever going to be like your starting guy. Yeah. But he could be like your Dante Fowler light, like your pass rush specialist, like your third rotational piece, but you're still looking for that stud there, and that's why I say, like, you maybe resign Jalen Holmes or resign, whoever you want to sign as some depth, right? But you still need, again, like, Ojulari would be probably a great fit here as that third rotational guy, but you still need that premier juice kind of potential on the perimeter as an edge rusher. And I think that's where this is so interesting, is because you're not going to find that guy in free agency. Maybe you don't draft him this year. Maybe it's hey, we're kind of playing for 2026, which would be a totally fine move if that's what they're trying to do. But those are the positions that you're looking for. And I think every team's looking for them. So that's not like great analysis necessarily, but I think that's kind of the direction you're thinking about at those positions. Continue to raise the floor, find some developmental talent, and then hopefully you have some developmental pieces moving forward into, the later years of Jayden Daniels' contract.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing is, it comes up quick as the Texans are realizing, like, oh crap, we have to trade. I mean, their logic in trading Tunsil, I think, is questionable at best. But part of it is like, hey, we only have so long before we have to pay CJ and Will Anderson because they did the double. Jayden, is it's like, oh, it's 3 years until you got to pay him. It's like 3 years will go fast. So definitely going to be interesting to watch how Adam and company do it. So that's our show for today. Logan Paulsen there. You can follow him on Instagram at Logan_Paulsen82. You can also check out a ton of his work with the Commanders, multiple podcasts, the Command Center show on TV/YouTube, etc. Of course, for me, Craig Hoffman, you can check me out on the Hoffman Show, 4 o'clock daily on the Team 980, streams live on YouTube at the Team 980. You can also listen in the free Odyssey app. You can also check out the Take Command podcast there and anywhere else you get your podcast in audio form. And of course, this is going to be on demand on YouTube. You can just rewind and watch at your leisure throughout the day if you joined us late live. Subscribe wherever you are watching or listening right now. That way, whenever we publish an episode, especially during this unpredictable time of the year, we typically try to do 2 a week on a pretty regular schedule, publishing Tuesday, Thursday mornings. But with the news being what it is this week, we're a little chaotic and we don't want you to miss an episode. So make sure you subscribe wherever you are watching or listening right now. For Logan, I am Craig, and we will see you next time on Take Command.